When the wrecking ball hit my mountain mansion, cameras were already rolling, and the HOA president was smiling. They said the house was being demolished over unpaid fines, a stack of paper citations nobody ever served. I stood at the edge of the property, snow drifting through the pines, watching walls crumble that had taken a decade to build. They thought I was just another wealthy recluse who wouldn't fight back. They were wrong, and by the time the dust settled, the entire state would know it. The mansion wasn't just a home. It was a landmark perched above the valley, built with permits, inspections, and approvals framed on my office wall. For years, the HOA tolerated it because my name opened doors and funded roads. Then a new board took over, hungry for control, obsessed with fines, violations, and technicalities. Overnight, letters appeared claiming I owed 6 figures for imaginary infractions. No hearings, no appeals, just threats. I tried reason first. I called meetings, sent attorneys, requested documentation. Every request vanished into silence, replaced by notices stamped final. When I asked how they planned to enforce something so clearly illegal, the answer came back smug and confident. They would make an example of me. They would show everyone that no one was above the HOA. What they didn't understand was timing. I had been quiet for a reason. An election had just ended. The oath was scheduled for the following week. While they celebrated their paperwork victory, I was preparing briefing books, security details, and transition meetings. On demolition day, I wasn't hiding. I was watching, recording, and letting them finish the mistake they had rushed into. As the last beam fell, I made a single call. Not to a lawyer, not to the press. I called my chief of staff and asked for a full report on every regulatory authority that touched private communities. The gears began to turn. The mountain echoed with more than collapsing stone. It echoed with consequences. That night, I drove down the mountain in silence, passing neighbors who pretended not to see me. My phone filled with messages, some apologetic, some panicked, some arrogant. I didn't reply. Power doesn't shout first. It waits, gathers facts, and chooses the moment. By morning, files were moving, calendars clearing, and phones ringing across offices that had never heard my name spoken angrily. The HOA believed fines made them untouchable. They had confused paperwork with authority, and authority with immunity. In the coming days, that confusion would cost them everything they thought they controlled. Nothing about what happened next would be accidental, quiet, or forgivable. It would unfold publicly, legally, and painfully slow for them, across every single level. The next morning, headlines framed the story the way the HOA wanted. Unpaid fines, defiant owner, lawful enforcement. They hadn't counted on how boring truth can be when documented properly. My transition team pulled every record tied to that association, from zoning variances to emergency access plans. What started as a demolition quickly became a compliance audit spanning years. The mansion was gone, but the paper trail was intact, and it told a very different story. The HOA operated like a private kingdom, but kingdoms still sit inside states. They levied fines without notice, seized property without hearings, and contracted demolition without jurisdiction. Worse, they had done it before, just not to someone who could see the entire board at once. As reports stacked up, patterns emerged. Selective enforcement, retaliatory penalties, cozy relationships with contractors who always seemed to win bids. I kept my distance publicly. No statements, no interviews. Silence made them bold. Board members went on local radio celebrating accountability. The president joked about teaching rich owners humility. Every word was archived, every boast timestamped. While they talked, agencies coordinated quietly. Housing regulators flagged violations. Environmental offices questioned runoff permits. Emergency services asked why access roads were blocked by unauthorized gates. By the end of the week, the HOA's legal counsel requested a meeting. They framed it as reconciliation. I framed it as education. In a conference room overlooking the ruins, I listened as excuses piled up. Clerical errors, overzealous volunteers, miscommunications. I let them finish before sliding a folder across the table. Inside were findings, not accusations. Timelines, statutes, photographs, signatures. That was the moment recognition landed. They finally understood who had been standing on the mountain. Not a homeowner, not a recluse. The incoming governor. Their authority had ended where mine began, and they had crossed that line with machines, invoices, and arrogance. From that point forward, the story was no longer about a house. It was about power learning its limits. And there was still the matter of restitution. Demolition wasn't cheap, but neither was rebuilding trust. The state doesn't move out of anger. It moves through process. That process was now awake. Notices would go out. Licenses would be reviewed. Boards would be interviewed under oath. I didn't need revenge. I needed precedent. Communities across the mountains were watching, and what happened next would decide how small authorities treated citizens for decades. The ruins behind me became evidence, not loss. Every broken stone marked a line they never should have crossed. Power answers to structure, and structure had finally noticed them. This lesson would be taught carefully, publicly, and without mercy. Because law, when ignored, has a way of remembering names. Especially theirs, forever, afterwards alone. Investigations move slower than outrage, but they move deeper. Inspectors arrived where the HOA never expected scrutiny. Financial records showed fines routed into discretionary accounts. Contracts revealed inflated demolition costs paid to friendly firms. Emails, once casual, read like confessions when aligned against statutes. The board's confidence evaporated as subpoenas replaced newsletters. I testified once, briefly, not as a victim but as a witness. The focus wasn't my mansion. It was the system that allowed destruction without due process. Regulators outlined requirements the HOA had ignored for years. Notice periods, appeal rights, emergency standards. Each omission carried penalties, and together they formed something worse than incompetence. They formed intent. Neighbors who had stayed silent found courage. Retirees described harassment over paint colors. Families recalled liens filed without warning. One farmer spoke about access roads blocked during wildfire season. The pattern widened beyond one mountain. It became a statewide reckoning for private governance unchecked by oversight. The HOA tried to settle. Money appeared on the table. Apologies followed. They asked me to make it go away. I declined. Settlements hide lessons. Enforcement teaches them. Licenses were suspended. The board was dissolved. An administrator was appointed to unwind years of abuse carefully. Standing on the cleared foundation, I imagined rebuilding, then stopped. Some spaces should remain empty to remind people what arrogance costs. Instead, I announced a public overlook and trail, dedicated to property rights and due process. The land would serve everyone, not intimidate them. When the final orders were signed, no speech followed. Results spoke louder. Other HOAs updated bylaws overnight. Training sessions filled. Power recalibrated itself. The mountain was quiet again, not because voices were silenced, but because balance had returned. Leadership isn't measured by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to protect. I protected process, even when anger tempted shortcuts. The state learned alongside me. Oversight expanded. Appeals were simplified. Transparency became mandatory language, not optional courtesy. The mansion's absence became a presence in policy rooms, a constant reference point when power drifted. Every time someone asked how far authority could go, the answer pointed back to the mountain and stopped there. It was never personal, despite the headlines. It was structural. Fix the structure, and people suffer less. Ignore it, and rubble follows. My job required patience, documentation, and restraint, qualities rarely celebrated online but essential in governance. The mountain taught that lesson better than any briefing ever could, and its silence carried weight across committee rooms and courtrooms statewide. Consequences, once distant, felt immediate and real to those watching. That awareness changed behavior faster than any speech ever delivered. Quiet reforms began reshaping how communities governed themselves, starting with respect. For law and neighbors alike, repercussions didn't end with one association. Reviews spread to others operating in gray zones. Training became mandatory. Enforcement clarified boundaries. The state issued guidance reminding boards they served residents, not ruled them. Complaints dropped as procedures improved. Privately, I processed loss. Homes carry memory, and mine was gone. I walked the overlook often, listening to visitors who didn't recognize me. They spoke about fairness, about relief, about feeling protected. That mattered more than replacement walls. The former HOA president faced charges related to misuse of funds. Others resigned quietly. The contractor lost licenses. Accountability landed unevenly but firmly. No victory lap followed. Governance isn't about triumph. It's about maintenance. As budget sessions opened, lawmakers cited the Mountain case repeatedly. Bills passed with bipartisan support. Appeals deadlines extended. Demolition standards tightened. Emergency access codified. Each clause traced back to a moment of overreach. I addressed the state once, calmly. I said power must be visible enough to be questioned, and limited enough to be trusted. The applause was brief. Implementation took longer. That was fine. On the anniversary of the demolition, snow returned. I stood where the front door had been and watched hikers pass. The mountain looked the same. People did too. Only systems had changed, which is where change should live. Some critics claimed the outcome proved the title mattered more than the law. They missed the point entirely. The law mattered because it constrained the title. Without process, any office becomes a hammer. With it, authority becomes a tool. I welcomed audits of my own actions. Transparency cuts both ways. It builds trust by exposing limits. The overlook drew school groups. Teachers explained civic rights using the empty foundation. Kids asked why a house wasn't rebuilt. The answer was simple. Reminders can be stronger than replacements. Memory guards against repetition. As seasons passed, complaints shifted from fear to formality. People learned to appeal, to document, to expect notice. Boards learned to listen. Contractors learned to verify. The ecosystem stabilized. Loss remained, but it transformed into stewardship. I had traded walls for rules, and the trade felt fair. Governance improved quietly. That is how it should be. Loud power fails. Patient systems endure. My role became less visible, which meant success. When leaders fade, institutions work. The mountain remained a witness, offering perspective whenever ambition threatened balance. People visited for views, unaware they were also seeing restraint made permanent. That invisibility was intentional. It kept the lesson alive without spectacle or slogans. Systems learned. So did I. And that learning would matter later, because power is always tested again, and preparation beats outrage every time, especially when stakes are high. High above valleys, where mistakes echo, long after headlines fade away. The case closed quietly, which is how durable change ends. No parade marked the shift, just updated manuals and calmer meetings. The overlook remained open. The trail wore in. Life continued. I never rebuilt the mansion. Insurance paid. Donations funded the park. The loss became collective benefit. When asked if I regretted not using power sooner, I answered honestly, timing matters. Let systems reveal themselves before you fix them. Years later, new leaders faced temptations I recognized. I shared the mountain story without names. Principles travel better than grudges. Respect process. Protect notice. Limit force. The HOA ceased to exist. A cooperative replaced it. Elected and transparent. People argued, voted, and complied. Not perfectly, but fairly. Standing at the edge one last time, I felt closure. The house had taught me comfort. Its absence taught me restraint. Both lessons belonged where snow meets stone. Power didn't win, law did. And that distinction is everything. Viewers often ask what they should take from this story. The answer isn't to seek office or flex authority. It's to document, to participate, and to insist on procedure. Small powers cause big harm when unchecked. Big powers must accept even tighter limits. Communities thrive when rules are boring, predictable, and fair. Drama signals failure. If you find yourself cheering destruction, pause. Ask who skipped steps and who benefits. Demand notice. Demand hearings. Demand records. The mountain doesn't care about titles. It endures. People pass through. Systems decide whether that passage feels safe or hostile. I chose to strengthen the system, even when it cost me a home. That choice paid dividends far beyond one property. If there's a moral here, it's simple. Rights survive when exercised calmly. Power behaves when watched. And the quiet work of governance matters most when nobody is clapping. Remember, fines and forms are tools, not weapons. Used correctly, they guide. Used recklessly, they wound. If you ever stand before rubble, don't rush to rebuild. First, rebuild the rules. That foundation lasts longer than stone, and it supports everyone equally. From valleys to peaks, across seasons and administrations. This is how balance is kept. Quietly, deliberately together. Thank you for listening, and for caring about process. Confirm below to end. Or revisit earlier chapters. Because details matter, especially when power is involved. Always. Stay curious. Stay engaged, and never assume authority is self-correcting. Participation is the safeguard that keeps communities fair, resilient, and humane, even when pressure rises and patience thins, because vigilance shared by many prevents harm that silence allows. This principle guided every decision after the mountain fell. It will guide the next generation too, if they choose to watch and participate early, not after damage is done, here, now.